Hello, everyone, again. I think we're ready to start right now. A warm welcome to all of you from IPU headquarters in Geneva. We are thrilled to welcome you to this webinar, which is entitled When Less is More, Alternatives to Legislation When Combating Hatred Based on Religion or Belief. My name is Anda Philip, and I'm the Director for Member Parliaments and External Relations at the IPU. Before I begin, we'd like to make a few announcements in terms of housekeeping rules. We do have interpretation provided in French, Spanish, and Arabic. You can access the interpretation by pushing the translation button on your Zoom screen. We will also be recording this webinar and posting it on our events page. Please note that we only post the interventions of the panelists and not the audience interventions. We want to make sure that this remains a safe and private space for you where you can freely express your ideas and your proposals. Today's webinar marks the fourth and final session in the four-part series From Theory to Action, Parliamentarians Against Hatred Based on Religion or Belief, Crafting Pathways to More Peaceful, Inclusive, and Just Societies. We started this series last year in November, together with our partners, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and with the support of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief, IPPFoRB. Later in the webinar, we will hear from both of our partners as to what other activities they are planning, which may be of interest and relevance to our parliamentarians. I'd like to say that when we designed this webinar series, it was mainly to respond to the increase of hatred based on religion or belief that we see in all corners of the world. And we also wanted to address the different challenges that these is posing to our societies. We are particularly concerned about how religious hatred threatens peaceful coexistence and undermines the full and equal enjoyment of fundamental rights and freedoms, such as freedom of religion or belief, freedom of expression, and the right to be free from discrimination. Throughout this webinar series, we have explored the topic of religious hatred from several angles and through an exchange with parliamentarians and other experts. When considering hate speech, we quite often end up talking about laws. And this makes sense because, of course, the parliamentarians primarily have a legislative mandate. However, legislative action is only one function of the MPs. They are also representatives, and we need to bear in mind that many acts considered hateful can indeed also be lawful. Furthermore, addressing the root causes of hatred and building bonds of trust between communities and countering intolerance is much more than ensuring a legal framework that is put in place. So this is the topic of today's webinar, where we want to look at alternatives to legislation when combating hatred based on religion or belief. I am delighted to be joined today by three prominent experts in the field. I welcome the participation of Senator Salma Ataulajan of the Canadian Parliament, who has shared with us at the IPU many of her good practices in promoting religious literacy about Islam in Parliament and in society, and in making Muslim Canadians feel seen and welcome. We have with us Rabbi Alex Goldberg, who wears multiple hats. He is the Rabbi of Guildford, the Dean of Religious Life and Belief at the University of Surrey, a member of the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council of Europe, and the faith focal point of the Faith for Rights community of practices. And we have with us Mr. Ibrahim Salam, the former chief of the Human Rights Treaties branch at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the initiator of the Faith for Rights framework, a pioneer in the field of engaging faith actors in the promotion of human rights. We all know that religious minorities are particularly targeted by hate speech. And I note that two of our guests today belong to religious minorities in their respective countries. And so it will be interesting to hear their insights in this regard as well. We are aiming for an interactive discussion today, and I would invite all of our speakers to engage with each other. Later on, we will be taking questions from the audience. If you do have questions, please raise your hand or write your question in the chat box. So to get started, please allow me to welcome again Senator Ataullah of Canada. Senator, may I kindly invite you to present yourself, to tell us a little bit about how hatred based on religion or belief expresses itself in Canada, to talk a little bit about your experience as a Muslim parliamentarian, your work in countering ignorance, prejudice, or hatred, and also how you see the risks that may be associated with over-legislating when it comes to religious hatred. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And again, I want to take this opportunity to thank the IPU and for this opportunity to speak. And as usual, you know, it's a very timely discussion. It's a discussion that we've had in the past with the IPU, and I hope that we'll continue to have, because as we have seen, recent past hatred based on religion, instead of you know, the conversations we've had, and we hope that people would listen and we wouldn't be seeing acts of violence based on your religious identity. But in Canada, we've seen an increase, and here I will be speaking on the Canadian experience. So I want to say hello to my fellow panelists, and it's a delight to be here with you today. So I want to talk about this issue, which has shaped much of my work in the Senate of Canada: how hatred based on religion or belief continues to harm communities and what we can do about it. I welcome the chance to share reflections on the Canadian experience, an experience that, while shaped by a proud commitment to multiculturalism, is also marked by painful truths. As a Muslim woman and a long-standing senator, and also as someone who's been on the Human Rights Committee for 15 years, as vice chair, as chair of the Human Rights Committee, much of my work has focused on human rights, especially in lifting up the voices of those who are too often pushed to the margins. One of the most personal and meaningful efforts I have led was our first Senate study on Islamophobia. Let me begin by saying that hatred based on religion or belief isn't something that we just talk about in theory. It's real, and it's rising. In 2024, hate crimes targeting religion were the second highest reporting category in Canada, just after race-based hate crimes. And one of the most painful memories the Canadian Muslims have, and it's still fresh in our collective memory, took place in 2017, when 6 men were gunned down while praying at a Quebec mosque. Sadly, that was not the first tragedy, and it has not been the last. We recently had in the library, in a public space in broad daylight, a Muslim woman who was wearing a hijab, someone tried to set fire to her. But hatred always doesn't take the form of violence. That's something that we heard again and again in our hearings. Islamophobia shows up in everyday acts: being followed in a store, being mocked at in school, being passed over for housing or jobs. Muslim women are especially targeted, often harassed for wearing visible religious dress. We also heard that Islamophobia can be systemic. It takes the shape of laws and policies rooted not in malice, but in long-standing bias, especially in areas like national security. Our committee also began a study on anti-Semitism, because according to B'nai B'rith, 2024 saw the highest number of reported anti-Semitic incidents in our history. synagogues were set on fire, a Jewish school was shot at, and more than once. Faced with these realities, the impulse to legislate is understandable, but we must ask ourselves, are we building inclusion or just expanding enforcement? Legal tools matter, but they have limits. Canada's 2024 Action Plan on Combating Hate reminded us that people in areas with high hate crimes rates report lower feelings of belonging. We can't legislate safety, we have to foster it. One witness told us, countering hate speech at an early age may be more efficient than attempts to regulate it. That insight has stayed with me. That's why we recommended federal support for provinces to create age-appropriate educational resources. But educators need training too. We can't expect them to lead these conversations without support. Beyond legislation, Canadian parliamentarians have taken steps to build trust. The All-Party Parliamentary Interfaith Caucus brings MPs, senators, and faith leaders together. These conversations may not make headlines, but they build peace. And as a Muslim parliamentarian, I know how important visibility is. I also know how exhausting it can be to carry the weight of that visibility. But I remain committed to showing up because every time we speak openly about faith, fear, and belonging, we make it easier for others to be heard. Let me close by saying this, that when it comes to combating hatred, legislation may be the loudest tool, but education, dialogue, and compassion are often the most powerful. So let us continue to lead with empathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Taolojan. May I now turn to Rabbi Goldberg, and may I kindly invite you to introduce yourself and to say a few words about your experience of how religious hatred manifests itself in the UK, what you observe in light of your various functions as a rabbi, as a member of the Muslim Jewish Leadership Council at the university as well. I'd like to ask you how you view an appropriate engagement between religious leaders and parliamentarians to counter this type of hatred. And how do you see the risks associated with legislation? Thank you.
It's a very big question, so thank you very much. My name is Rabbi Alex Goldberg. I think you've already given quite a few introductions. In the past, I used to work for the British government intervening in what we used to call race riots in the early 2000s, the early millennium. And some of what I'm going to say here reflects on that, and some of the work I do today, both in the university sector, but also on the Faith Ministers' Social Cohesion Committee and the Chief Police Officers, or the PCC's group on faith, religion, and race. Let me start with a very small story, if I may, because I think it's important for me and parliamentarians to sometimes bridge religion and parliament. There's a story in the Talmud about Oni, the circle maker. I'm not going to go into him. He's a fascinating guy. He's a circle maker because he creates rain. But he sees a man planting a carob tree and asks, how long will it take for this fruit to bear? And the man says 70 years. And Oni looks at him, and this old man, and he says, will you ever live to eat from it? And the old man goes, no, not really. And he goes, so why are you doing it, says Oni. He says, I'm doing it because when I came into the world, I ate the fruit planted by my grandparents and parents, and I want my children and grandchildren to enjoy my fruit. And this has become a personal mantra for me in how we invest in the future. Some parliaments run 4 or 5 years, some longer, but elections are short term for parliaments, and I think we need to be long term. Let me look at a few experiences and how Parliament can help. As both Rabbi of Guildford, Dean of Religious Life at the University of Surrey, and more latterly, I'm also the faith convener of the City of London Corporation's project to serve the faith needs of the 685,000 workers 8,000 residents in our square mile, our financial district. I've seen what happens when relationships exist before crisis and how they can be resolved. It's always about communication, and where MPs are involved and parliamentarians are involved to bring people together, to convene people from their constituencies, then there can be massive impact. Where parliamentarians decide to add up and weigh up votes between different communities and back one over the other, it tends to end in disaster. That's not a political view, that's my professional view. And where have I seen it work? In Stamford Hill, there's 20 years of having an imams and rabbis group. The rabbis are strictly Orthodox, the imams are very conservative Indian Muslims. And there are international tensions, as we know, but when they occur, the imams and the rabbis meet and they speak to the younger people. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's in a more conservative, paternalistic community. I work for something called the Safe Communities Initiative, where we did many things. But again, we were brought in and the MPs were always supportive. They were always there. In Wrexham, there was a race riot when the asylum service in the UK brought in about 400 to 600 new asylum seekers who were Kurdish at the time, 20 years ago. And there was a pot of paint, and the locals went on a riot for 3 days thinking the asylum seekers had a pot of paint. We had enormous statutory powers. We had the power of legislation to even bring criminal charges against the police and Wrexham Council for allowing things to get out of control. Instead, we use soft power. We use our convening power to bring the communities together, along with the police and social services and city. And we resolved that there was no paint, there was no refurbishment, the estate was bad. And then the Kurdish community and the white community joined together and demanded their estate changed. And actually there was a program put in. The same in Southampton, when we had 500 young people who were in gangs come to a Southampton FC football ground and with a famous Fox group at the time. And again, they came together and we found out the problem wasn't each other, but actually the fact there were two schools, and there was no school in what was the old dock area, which had now a massive young population. So we had an ethnic minority population being bussed into a white population where people were walking to school, going by car. We had social class difference. We had a lack of locality, or people even mixing with each other after school because they were bussed back. So we rechanged the school system in Southampton City Council, and the Home Office thanked us. Why am I giving these examples? Because all the time we had local MPs. I'm going to skip the next examples, but I'm very grateful to the work I've done over 25 years with Lord John Mann, as I chaired the FA's Faith Reference Group. We had a problem 20 years ago, and we still do today, of anti-Semitism, and at the time we had rising Islamophobia on the terraces in the football stadiums in the UK, and we observed it. And we worked with Lord John Mann and other parliamentarians as well to try and reduce to try and change the game by having better reporting systems, better stewarding, making sure the clubs engage with their supporters, making sure that local politicians, so that their clubs, which are iconic, especially at the Premier League and Championship League level, should be centre of the community and not be favouring one community over another, one sectarian group over another. Traditionally, some football supporters in this country have been tribally divided by religion. Tottenham identified with the Jewish community, although their fans are not overwhelmingly Jewish, and songs are sung at their football matches about Auschwitz and about Jews. Liverpool and Everton, you have the Catholic-Protestant divide, and north of the border in Scotland, you obviously have Celtic and Rangers, who have a long division. Over the past decade, I've worked on national and European responses to these challenges. Currently, we're working with, again, parliamentarians in the OHCHR to look at the future of Jewish lives and Muslim lives in Europe in defense of religious freedom. It's about bringing communities together rather than using legislation. And I guess the reason that I keep on going back to this method of bringing together young people, bringing together communities, engaging in dialogue, the most beautiful, which was actually at Wembley Stadium in Britain, which over 4 years we took in 4 single-faith schools a year. They met several times, and they would get to know each other. They'd get to understand each other's religion, their culture, their loves, their likes. And they found that they had 2 identities. We had Muslim, we had Shia, Sunni, Anglican, Catholic, Methodist, Jewish, Orthodox, Jewish Reform, Hindu and Sikh schools, 4 a year, but over 4 years, many of them. And we found there were 2 identities. One was their religion, perhaps their culture. Sometimes even within a school there are cultural differences. Some schools were Bengali in heritage, some were Irish in heritage, some were Somali in heritage. That is the diversity and beauty of London. But they also found out they had another identity, and the dynamic changed. The identity around those great tribes of Arsenal, Manchester United, Barcelona and Bayern. And you may jest, but when they were as young people, aged 9, 10, 11, they realized identity was more complex than that. And we've done some lateral studies latterly that as they grew up, they understood that this was, they learned some of the lessons from that, having met their first Jew or first Muslim or first Catholic or first Protestant or Hindu through that. So how should parliamentarians and religious leaders work together? Parliamentarians don't legislate, I know that. They convene, they represent, they set the tone of national conversations. And that's why I believe that we must embed frameworks like the UN Faith and Rights into public life. I teach it at the University of Oxford, where we apply it with activists on the ground in crisis zones all over the world. But actually for Parliament to do it, for Parliament to engage with religion and the religious traditions and the traditions of civic responsibility and human rights, which are at the heart of many parliamentary models, it's vital. For me, Faith for Rights brings together religious conscience and universal human rights, and its 18 commitments from combating incitement to hatred to promoting gender equality and dignity. If used in Parliament, it can serve as a shared language and an ethical framework for engagement between faith actors, parliamentarians, and even business communities. I've seen it work on campuses, I've seen it work in crisis zones, so why not work with parliamentarians and their communities? I used to organise a roundtable every month when I was both at the Faith Forum for London as its chair and at the London Jewish Forum with London MPs in Parliament. And we used to have constituents, local councillors from their party, policy people from civil society. And we would concentrate on that locality. We would concentrate on their constituency. Every area is different, and parliamentarians know their constituents best. And they have a powerful role, whether the person elected them or didn't elect them, whether chosen by them or didn't chosen by them, they are there to represent their constituents over a period of time. They know their localities, they know their areas where parliaments work like that, and they have a convening power. Most recently, I was really pleased that our local MP backed the declaration of religious freedom in our town on the 750th anniversary of the expulsion of the Jews from our town. It was backed by civil society and faith leaders, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Baha'i, and humanists. But it was also backed by the local MP. And I forgot we had 2 MPs in the room because our Lord Bishop is a member of the member of the House of Lords. What should I say?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just end on this? Whilst I think that legislation, there are alternative legislation, some of us on this call, including your next speaker, and I have met with social media companies and the like. We think there needs, and if Parliament models this, we think there is a need for change. That social media, which is the media and the publication means of many young people today, needs to have a space for dialogue as well as shouting at each other or supporting a point of view. And going back to the carrot tree, we need to create this ecosystem so all of us plant seeds for our children and grandchildren, but it will take a very long time. It will take parliamentarians to do it alongside their communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Goldberg, for these very thoughtful reflections. And you've mentioned a number of aspects. You've also mentioned the Faiths for Rights framework, which gives me a very good introduction now to reach out to Mr. Ibrahim Salama, We have been working closely for several years now with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I would like to invite you, Mr. Salama, to introduce to us the Beirut Declaration, the Faith for Rights Framework and Toolkit, as well as the UN Community of Practices. And again, if you could share with us how you see possible risks associated with over-legislating when it comes to religious hatred. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was privileged to be there from the beginning of the conception of this framework, along a number of pioneers from both the faith community and the human rights community. And actually, the developments over the past few years were eye-opener. The framework itself was innovative in many ways, in that it didn't limit itself to be just another declaration or a merely soft law set of standards. But very quickly, a couple of years after its adoption in Beirut in 2017, we started developing, out of the need by the practitioners themselves, a toolkit of peer-to-peer learning, transforming the 18 commitments that define the human rights role and responsibilities of faith actors into discussion modules, training modules among peers. And soon after that, probably just 2 years later, we started a community of faith for rights practices, which really taught us a lot about the ground realities. And if I jump from these ground realities to the role of parliamentarians, of course, I cannot agree more with the risks of over legislating in the matter, because this will be a mirror image of the same risks at the international level. We have seen the controversies at the international level about defining notions like defamation of religion or protecting specific symbols. And this leads to nowhere, because cultural factors are by definition very personal and identities are multiple, as Alex just said, and people get on the wrong track immediately if you speak from a symbolic or an identity standpoint. I would jump to my conclusion by saying that if I think about the role of parliamentarians, it's certainly not to legislate more on the matter, but probably to supervise whether or not the existing legislations do respect the international standards. Because in the area of hate speech, which was one of our vehicles to reach the Faith for Rights framework at large, it actually started with a Rabat threshold and action plan in 2012, and it took us 5 years to reach the fuller Faith for Rights framework. But the importance of incitement to violence, hostility, or discrimination was and remains the daily struggle of legislators. And to this effect, one of the main areas of very positive action is for parliamentarians, I submit for their consideration, is to consider checking the national legislations against the Rabat threshold, the findings of the relevant special rapporteurs, the recommendations of the relevant treaty bodies, particularly the Committee on Human Rights, which is custodian of Articles 18, 19, and 20 on freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and prohibition of incitement to violence. So this trio of complex legal notions need constant update and review. That's, I would submit, area number one for parliamentarians. But most importantly, and beyond the law, this issue, as Alex just also mentioned, the people act in their local grassroots surroundings as an impulse and in collaboration and in reaction to each other. So community leaders at the local level, including politicians within their own respective circumscriptions, have a very important role in raising awareness and in ensuring that local initiatives that are adapted to the environment are in place. It's all about a constant rights-based dialogue and trying to apply the relevant provision of both national legislation and related international ones on hate speech, for example, on minority rights, on respect for differences, on limits of speech that are permissible or not, trying to apply it at the national level. And all of this is just avoiding the negative impact of tensions between communities, instrumentalizing religion or based on religion. But then there is a positive role as well, which is going beyond the mere prohibitions into trying to educate people on how enriching their differences are. We usually hate what we ignore. It's a very old wisdom that we see happening every day. So explaining the different faith traditions and the cultural backgrounds of people rather than living with them from a tolerance point of view, which is really not the respectful approach to differences, is another role for parliamentarians in their own local levels. Thirdly, and I would say even most importantly, the impact of parliamentarians on the conception and the review of the public policies in the area of education and the role of faith actors within their societies. There is a lot that we can learn from numerous initiatives at the international level lately, but there is a disconnect between many international frameworks and initiatives and lessons and the national level. And I think the right bridge between the international experience and the national practices is members of the IPU in particular, both parliamentarians and the Secretariat, because um, um, facilitating the access to the international experiences to the national level through parliamentarians is, I think, another very important role. And I would keep it at this level for this stage of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three of you. This has been very, very rich in terms of the thoughts that you have shared with us and your own personal experiences. We've also heard some very good examples of good practices in countering religious hatred. I've taken copious notes, and we are, of course, reminded that hatred takes on various forms. It's not just violence. It can take on very silent and intrusive forms as well. We are reminded, of course, that Islamophobia and anti-Semitism can be systemic, and as such, we need to be looking at systemic responses. We note that, and of course, I think this stands at the very core of what IPU over the decades has been trying to provide, a platform for communication, engagement, dialogue. And religious leaders, parliamentarians, they share that convening power, which can make a huge difference when it comes to exercising that soft power, ensuring prevention, and playing an early warning role as well. We are reminded that we need to treat society and communities in all their diversity, and we need to make that effort to focus on what unites us, whether it's sports, whether it's music, and certainly engaging the young people. Very importantly, how can we better embed our shared commitments and values into public life? And here, as was very rightly said, there is an opportunity for parliaments and parliamentarians to more closely examine the Faith for Rights framework, for them to see how this can best be applied in terms of their national realities, that they can play a role in supervising that their national legislation is in line with our shared commitments, including the Rabat threshold, and that we all engage in that rights-based dialogue. And very importantly, another takeaway from your points, the need to review public policy in the sphere of education, so as to bridge that gap that sometimes exists between international experience and national practice. And that's actually, these are some of the points that we have tried to also capture in the forthcoming report, parliamentary report on interfaith dialogue, that will be issued next week and which will be inviting all of you to consult. I am conscious of time, and I'd like to open up the discussion to our participants online. But before I do that, I would like to ask our three distinguished panelists if you have any brief remarks or responses to what you have heard from your fellow panelists. You've already given examples of good practices, but is there anything you would like to respond to? If not, we will move on. Mr. Salama, please.
Just in one sentence, it's less of a response rather than a potential gap stroke area to think together about, which is the adaptation and the adaptability of the Faith for Rights framework. It doesn't immediately jump to the eye how to take from an international standard something and adapt it to the national level. And this in itself, I'm inviting not only my fellow panelists, but all the participants to think about it. And maybe Michael can refer us to the experience with an American university about this particular issue and a couple of articles that deal with it. But I think we need to simplify the adaptability exercise or the adaptation exercise one way or another, because not all parliamentarians are sufficiently, which is logical and respectful, are sufficiently into these international issues. So if you say an international set of standards, what do you do to transform it into a nationally adapted policy or tool? That's the question. Thank you.
Very good point and well noted, absolutely. And maybe later on this, I note that we have our colleague, Rohiezo Huizenga, who's joining us for this meeting. He is heading the human rights work at the IPU, and I think he can refer us a little bit about how, as an organization, we are trying to work with our national parliaments in trying to facilitate this adaptation and implementation of international commitments when it comes to the day-to-day work within national parliaments. I thought I saw Rabbi Goldberg. Did you want to say a few words?
I think that when I used to represent the Jewish community 25 years ago, certainly in the area of schools and education. And in that area, faith communities, when we came together, were seen as the solution because we ran a third of the schools in the UK. But often when I'm in meetings with government ministers, faith ministers, communities ministers, home secretaries, and other parliamentarians, they see faith as a challenge, a problem. We talk about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia. In other parts of the world, we talk about church burnings or Hindus being attacked in, well, I'm not going to name places, but being immolated and things like that. And I think that my own experience is that there is therefore an unease in some parliamentary cultures, and certainly in the one that I'm used to in the UK. Yes, they want the photograph with me. That's nice. And they want the bishop or the imam or all three of us is great. But I think that actually why I like Faith for Rights in particular, and there are other frameworks, just the parliamentarian getting their imam, their rabbi, and their communities into parliament and talking together about what is the good of what can we do for the good of our community? What can we do collectively to change our town, our city, our village, to make it a better place, a better society, better schools, better welfare? And I'll leave with this one note. One parliamentarian, I'll name him, why not? Ed Balls once said to me, "Why do you people," and he meant faith people, not my faith, but why do you people seem to deliver for us schools at a better quality for a cheaper price with better outcomes? And I said, well, perhaps we think our reward comes later, but actually we do it because we care about our communities and we care about societies. When we come together with parliamentarians, civil society and parliamentary power can be very, very strong. And I think we should see it as a positive good and not always as a challenge.
Thank you so much for that. Senator Ataullah.
Thank you. So as a parliamentarian, I feel it's the responsibility on parliamentarians and leadership is that we have to be very mindful of our language and we have to foster unity and not divisions. And that's what I try to do is if I ever speak on Islamophobia, my identity is Muslim, and I am very mindful of the fact that I represent the 2 million Muslims in Canada. That's almost 5% of the population of Canada. Is that when I speak of Islamophobia, I speak on, other religion, like I speak on anti-Semitism. We've had incidences of church burning in Canada too. So we have to be mindful to include everyone, because, we're leaders and people look at you and people, they pick up from what you're saying. So if we stand up and we talk only about one religion, at least I don't do that, because my core identity, I am a Muslim, but I'm also Canadian. And in Canada, we try and bring people together, try and bring people of different faiths together. And we look at what unites us and not what divides us. So I have that responsibility, as do other parliamentarians, of fostering unity.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I think, as I mentioned earlier, next week we will be holding in Rome the second parliamentary conference on interfaith dialogue. And I think we're very much encouraged by the appetite, the interest, the response we have received across the board, both from our member parliaments as well as from academia. And we totally subscribe to the point that it is so critically important to bring in this intellectual community of experts, religious leaders, faith-based organizations, civil society. And I think that what we've heard today and what we will be hearing next week in Rome will further inform our reflection on how we can better, address and build bridges towards more peaceful and inclusive societies with the engagement of all of these very important stakeholders. I said I would give Sarah the opportunity to say a few words. She has done an amazing job producing our second report. It's about 100 pages long. It's based on interviews with a lot of parliamentarians, but also feedback that we've received from our institutional partners. It'll be launched in just a few days' time. And I'd like to ask you, Sarah, from the findings that are reflected in that report, what do you think you would like to share today as, very inspiring and forward-looking examples?
Thank you, Anda, and hello, everybody. Well, I can say firstly that all three of our distinguished panelists have actually contributed to this report. We have some good practices from Senator Ataulajan. We have an interview with Rabbi Alex Goldberg, and we also have an example from Rabat that I hope that Ibrahim Salama might explain to us, where the Faith for Rights framework was used at a meeting of the CEDAW committee. Maybe that could come a little bit later with parliamentarians. But this report has been a very unique undertaking because this space of engagement, specifically between national parliaments and parliamentarians and religious actors, has not been very closely looked at on a global setting until we started this research several years ago. So the report wants to look at the rights approach, freedom of religion or belief, as you've been discussing today, and countering advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief. So where is this threshold to incitement, discrimination, hostility, or violence? And also gender equality, women's rights, and the protection of minorities. And I think this is a really unique thing about religions, is that it does span all across different policy areas. And what we've been seeing from this report especially is that really there is no national parliament or parliamentarian who is not in some way interested in the way that religion affects society and people's values, because it's important for the constituents that member represents, or for the inclusivities of laws that are going to be made through Parliament. So we've got really a diversity of examples that are presented there. From the UK, actually a number of really wonderful examples. If I recall, the Parliament has produced a guide on conspiracy theories, because today we're looking at this alternatives to legislation. for countering hatred. And this conspiracy theories guide produced for the UK Parliament looks at how religious narratives are often woven into a number of conspiracy theories, which tend to cause social rifts. So that was, I think, a really innovative approach to making an educational example, but also engaging with some of the narratives, especially prevalent amongst the youth these days. And as Senator Atalajan mentioned, we have these wonderful parliamentary caucuses where people come together to look at how faith and belief intersect with society. So I would say that this report has a lot to offer across a broad spectrum of areas. In the UK, there's also, for a few years now, there's been a Women's Faith Forum, which is 6 women from 5 different traditions who also engage with parliamentarians to bring out the aspect of women's leadership and also the fact that faith can be a uniting force. So it's not just parliamentarians going into society, into the religions, but across the religions as well, that there's a lot that really unites them. So there's really a diversity here, especially to this point of how do we create cohesive societies? How do we make parliaments inclusive and also very representative exactly of the diversity? And maybe a last point that I did recorded a podcast this morning with 2 parliamentarians on looking exactly at this issue of how do we create more cohesive societies? How do we counter polarization? One of the parliamentarians said, well, if you don't engage religious actors, then you're going to be engaging against each other at some point. So the invitation for dialogue is there, but if you actively exclude each other, then you do get these silos, which can actually manifest in quite dangerous ways sometimes. And another point that was made is that this bond of trust that is built, religions offer a space of safety for many in the communities, and parliamentarians who are trying to engage with some of these policy issues, maybe it's human trafficking, maybe it's modern slavery, require a space to be able to help these victims, and religions are often that space. So I feel like I could offer you a lot of examples from a year and a half working on this report and a conference coming next week, but that was what occurred to me listening to some of the thoughts that were thrown out here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's great. And congratulations once again for your fantastic work. As I said at the beginning, I do want to invite our partners from IPPFoRB and the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to say a few words about their forthcoming activities and opportunities for MPs to remain engaged. But before I do that, just to close this circle of interaction with our wonderful panelists, maybe I would turn to them with the last question and ask if you could provide us with some reflections or final thoughts about what you would like to see from parliaments and parliamentarians going forward in terms of non-legislative approaches to countering religious hatred. And secondly, how do you think the IPU could support such efforts? Shall we start with Senator Ataulajan, please?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. I continue to learn every time I interact with the IPU. So there's been some interesting conversations and on the role of parliamentarians, and I always say that parliamentarians, we can legislate, we can pass bills, until they're not enforced. That is just a useless piece of paper. And I also want to talk a little bit about the Canadian experience. We have a special representative on Islamophobia, we have a special representative on anti-Semitism, but I want to diverse a little bit from my experience of being visible. As parliamentarians, we have to be visible. In my role, I make sure I go to schools, I go to high schools, and I go to universities. And I got involved in politics almost 16, 17 years ago, being a senator for 15 years. And an incident that happened to me 15 years ago, just as a brand new senator, 2 months into the job, I was at an event in Edmonton, and this young Somali Muslim girl, she must have been about 10, 11, walked up to me. She was wearing a hijab. And I had spoken about my Muslim identity, and she said to me, she said, Senator, when I look at you, I realize there's a place for me in Canada. And I think that's what it's about. It's about making young people and old people realize, anyone of any age, that there's a place for them. They have a representation. So sometimes visible role models are very, very important. When I got involved, there was just, actually when I became a senator, there was one other Muslim senator and there was one Muslim parliamentarian. And I remember this incident of when we were doing our Islamophobia study, I had to go to the mosque because we were doing hearings there. And I was debating whether I should go in my traditional, those of you who don't know, I'm of Pakistani origin, and I was debating whether I should wear my traditional clothes because I'm mindful of going into the mosque, or whether I should go in Western clothing, because I find quite often, and my intention is not to offend anybody, but so many people in our community will not take the women seriously because they walk in with traditional clothings, and we are told, sisters, go to that space. And this is a whole other discussion we could have, and the challenge that we have. And with the discussion with my daughter, who said, "Mother, go in your traditional clothes, because let people see that people like us from different backgrounds walk the corridors of power." And we had to stop at a high school before we went to the mosque. And when I went into that high school, and there was about 30 Muslim students who came to talk to us, and all the young girls came to me and said, "If we had known you were coming wearing traditional clothes, I would have worn them too." So, it's being visible, being mindful of what you say, and know that you're representing a community and that looks up to you, and also being mindful of being a positive role model. I know I might have kind of digressed, but I thought this is an important conversation to have. And I want to welcome you, Mr. Salama, to Montreal. Canada is an incredible country, and we continue to learn, we continue to struggle. And I would love to host you in Ottawa if you ever come to Ottawa.
Thank you very much, Senator. Rabbi Goldberg.
I wish we had more parliamentarians like Senator Salma. I think it's very important to model by example, and also to reach out to other faiths across communities in the way that you do. What I think, hold multi-faith surgeries is what I think. Don't wait for a crisis. There are people around the world. I own consultancy fees, not much, but where I go in and I do preventative work. I build society. At the moment in the City of London, we're having a Faith in the City project, which will deal with the faith elements of those in the city. But it's actually bringing together some of the biggest companies in the world, with the City of London, with actually Westminster, with national parliament, and with faith leaders, to say, how can we create a more moral society, but also a more moral economy and more moral projects? And I still believe in London. I still believe in London, that what happens in London can be modelled elsewhere, and what happens in London is still copied elsewhere. I would say open your doors to all beliefs. I would promote intergenerational dialogue. I wouldn't set communities against each other. Some politicians do. I would bring communities together. I would use the Faith for Rights framework and model listening. I would encourage parliamentary mentorship, where you have perhaps 2-3 interns from 3 separate faiths intentionally working alongside you, perhaps even representing their communities within your office over a summer or 3 months or 6 months. I would champion diversity. I'd bridge public services and communities, build faith literacy in your parliaments, bring in people, the likes of me or the likes of my friends, the bishops and the imams and the priests, the Hindu priests and the Buddhist monks, to give a session from their perspective on Parliament and society, or a number of topics about welfare, health, education, not as lobbyists, but those who want to share, and maybe even have them together. I think it's very good. So my day starts, and I'll finish like this, as a very bad English joke. I walk into my office with a priest, a rabbi, an imam, and a monk. And I don't have a punchline for that joke, but I'm richer for it, and I believe parliamentarians would be too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Salama.
Thank you very much. I think as Senator Salma said it, role models are fascinating, but we need to show, and I think people like her who have by definition multiple identities and multiple belongings have a special capacity to be bridging gaps between different communities. But adding to this, the status of parliamentarian, who by definition is supposed to represent everybody and to connect everybody and to care for everybody. I think I didn't see personally, but maybe it's my mistake, enough engagement of faith actors under the parliamentaries in parliaments themselves. Talking about these issues, it's usually politicians and legislators trying to fix things the hard way. But the politics of engagements, the dynamic of enriching opening between societies, I don't know if there is enough of this within the parliamentarian holds themselves of or not, and always on an interreligious and interfaith basis, not only one community but many of them. Sarah mentioned an experience that we had in Rabat with the Office of the High Commissioner, which is to have a knowledge hub that includes faith actors and human rights specialists at the same time, to try to uncover and showcase the rights content of faith traditions. Because it's in a completely different language. They don't use the term rights. And the parliamentarian from Trinidad and Tobago mentioned it when she found the document or the title of Faith for Rights to be a little bit probably too intrusive or too unresting for some people who do not mix religions with rights. Religions are the historical source of human dignity and of rights of individuals, communities, and peoples. The main difference is that religions link rights and responsibilities, in my view, a more balanced way, and bring the economic side of rights alongside in a very balanced way, again, with the civil and political rights of things, things that can enrich the national legal approach to human rights and the international legal approach as well. So religious communities have a lot to offer if they only own the rights discourse and translate it into their own way. And that's why one of the main distinctive features of the Faith for Rights framework is that it's probably the only United Nations document under the auspices of the United Nations, at least, which contains religious quotes from different faith traditions and humanist and philosophical and even ancient traditions to symbolize a simple word. The value systems are mainstreams to the same river. And if we look at them as different parallel tracks, we miss a lot of the richness of an ocean of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you, and thank you to all our three panelists. I think this has been a very rich discussion. I would also like to thank our three very distinguished panelists. We've learned so much from you, and please rest assured of our commitment to continue as an institution, IPU, to invest in dialogue, to invest in diplomacy and mediation. We have actually identified interfaith dialogue as an important tool in peace building and in parliamentary diplomacy. And we will be continuing to look for ways to assist our MPs to fully play their role in this area. Very recently, last year, we launched a new toolkit for parliamentarians on common security and human security. And there we introduced for the first time parliamentary diplomacy as one of the pillars, the fifth pillar of the work carried out by the institution of Parliament. With this, I'd like to turn to our partners, and I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Lola Navarro from IPPFoRB.
Thank you, Anna, so much. And thank you to our partners for putting together this fantastic and very interesting series. Today, my name is Lola Navarro. I'm speaking on behalf of the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. I'm speaking on behalf of our director, Fernanda San Martin Carrasco, who could not join today. Just a little bit of an introduction. The IPPFoRB is an international non-partisan network of parliamentarians with more than 400 members from across 95 different countries. We are protecting and promoting freedom of religion or belief for everyone, everywhere, through advocacy, capacity building, and networking. Until now, we have been establishing a regional, one central academy a year in Oxford, but this year we are switching to regional academies in different regions of the world: Southeast Asia, Southeast Europe, Africa, and Latin America. But as I said, we work with parliamentarians from across 95 different countries, so we work on every region of the world. This move is in order or with the aim to focus on the specific challenges that people face on these 4 different regions. And I wanted to talk about what has been talked here today. I wanted to address Senator Salma Atalaya, and I wanted to say that yes, indeed, parliamentarians are a representative of their constituencies and also are looked up by them. I couldn't agree more, and I couldn't agree also more with Rabbi Goldberg when he said that parliamentarians have convening power. We do agree on this. We do believe that parliamentarian work is essential in protecting freedom of religion or belief and standing up against hatred, and not just through legislative work, but also through advocacy and through communication, as had been said today here in this webinar. I invite you all to please look at the IPPFoRB to get in touch. If you're in one of the regions that I've mentioned, Southeast Asia, Southeast Europe, Africa, or Latin America, please get in touch. Ask about the upcoming regional academies. We will be there, and we would like to invite you there. If you're not in those regions, anyways, please get in touch. We would like to hear from you. We would like to work with you, and we want every member of parliament to join the IPPFoRB and work in this important issue. So thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Lola, for this very important intervention, and thank you for all your support. We very much value your contribution to our efforts to bring this area of work deeper into the day-to-day work of national parliaments. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, thank you too.
And now I'm pleased to turn to our very good friend, Mr. Michael Wiener from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
Many thanks indeed, Anda, and really to everyone, heartfelt thanks for this wonderful journey that we have had the pleasure of traveling together since last November. It's a truly peer-to-peer learning exercise, and really everyone chipping in their experiences, expertise, what works, what doesn't work, and really listening to each other. So it has been really an eye-opening experience also for all of us. And I just wanted to pick up a point that Ibrahim just mentioned in terms of the ocean of wisdom. So if we bring together the various stakeholders, the rights holders, the duty bearers, the parliamentarians, the faith-based actors, the independent international experts, and so on, that is really giving new life to the international obligations. Also, what the Pact for the Future, Action 55, is very specifically asking in terms of collaboration between parliamentarians, United Nations, civil society, faith-based actors. So I think that has been really fascinating. And if I recap really just the 4 webinars, not going into the detail, but thinking back of what we actually discussed and then tried to unpack from freedom of religion or belief, from freedom of expression, what is incitement to hatred and violence, the Rabat threshold test, challenges in the context of social media platforms and hate speech, content moderation online, and today in terms of alternatives to legislation. And I think what, to me, kind of trying to not summarize it, but what I never saw that clearly is the complementarity between hard law norms. So that's basically the bread and butter of parliamentarians, adopting laws, penal laws, administrative laws, other laws. But then not only these hard law norms, but then also the soft law standards, which Ibrahim and Rabbi Alex were referring to in terms of Faith for Rights or Rabat Plan of Action, which is not legally binding, but still is being used and considered useful, especially in the context of online content moderation. And then the last point that Rabbi Alex also so compellingly outlined is the soft power. And I think this convening and the bringing people together, it's much more than soft power. It is really so important and can be impactful in a very concrete sense. And we have discussed so many examples of where it worked well and prevented actually incitement or violence and tensions. And my sincere hope is, and I'm very much looking forward to joining the Parliamentary Conference on Interfaith Dialogue next week in Rome, where we will also try to zoom in and also in this bigger setting to unpack related questions on freedom of religion or belief, interfaith dialogue. And then my last point, also to looking ahead in October 2025, when we will have our next Faith for Rights Community of Practice meeting, back to back also with the Global Ethics Forum in Geneva. So I'm very much looking forward to continuing this excellent cooperation with the Inter-Parliamentary Union, with you, Anda and Sarah, and also thanks a lot to Lola for the great partnership with IPPFoRB. Back to you, Anda.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to the United Nations for this great initiative. It's been a pleasure working with you, not just over these past 4 webinars, but more broadly on faith-related issues. And we do look forward to, once the dust has settled on the Rome conference, to sit down together, to unpack some of the findings, to draw some lessons, and to brainstorm on the next steps. And of course, I say again, we're a member-driven organizations. We will be keenly attuned to what we are hearing from our members and also from our partners in terms of suggestions for the way forward. So with this, we would like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We wish you all the best, and we look forward to staying in touch. All the best to everyone.